Ladies and gentlemen, the title for our next session is Subjunctive Fiction, Stories We'll Invent About the World We Inhabit. The speakers for this session are Qaisra Shahraz, Shehryar Fazli, Piyush, and moderator for this session is Framji Minwalla. Framji Minwalla is currently the chair of the Department of Social Sciences and Liberal Arts at the Institute of Business Administration, Karachi. His research interests include performance literature and history, visual and cultural studies, theater and politics, media and film. Dr. Minwalla was awarded BA by the University of Michigan and MFA and DFA both by the Yale School of Drama. Over to Framji.
Good afternoon, everybody. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. Piyush, Mumbai-based, did I get it right? Yeah. Mumbai-based Piyush is an acclaimed film director, advertising filmmaker, and the author of best-selling crime fiction novels. A student political leader at university, he pursued a career in advertising management after acquiring an MBA degree. Later, he switched tracks, first to make advertising commercials for some of the country's largest brands, and then to write and direct feature films. Shah's films, Chalo America, King of Bollywood, and Sikandar are noted for the unconventionality of the subject matter and for their relevance to contemporary society. His Mumbai-stan, Compass Box Killer, and Anti-Social Network are page-turners that explore the dark landscape of crime fiction in Mumbai. The novels have recently been released in Marathi as well. Currently, Shah is working on his next feature film as a director-writer and is also developing a crime-based TV show for a leading entertainment channel. He has recently launched his fourth crime thriller novel, Rakshas, India's #1 serial killer. To his left, Qaisra Shahraz. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts and a prize-winning and critically acclaimed novelist and scriptwriter. Born in Pakistan, she has lived in Manchester since childhood and gained 2 master's degrees in English and in European literature and in scriptwriting. Qaisra was recognized as one of 100 influential Pakistani women in Pakistan Power 100 list. She has been nominated for the Asian Women of Achievement Awards and for the Muslim News Awards for Excellence. She's a director of Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and has appeared at many international literary festivals and book fairs. Her novels, The Holy Woman, Typhoon, and Revolt, have been translated into several languages, including Mandarin. The Holy Woman won the Golden Jubilee Award and has become a bestseller in Indonesia and Turkey. Her award-winning drama serial, Dil Hi To Hai, was broadcast on Pakistani television in 2003 by Prime TV. Qaisra has recently completed 2 volumes of short stories, A Pair of Jeans, and Train to Krakow. In her other career, she is a successful educationist and an interfaith and gender activist. And to her left, Shehryar Fazli is the senior analyst and South Asia regional editor for the International Crisis Group, an independent Brussels-based nonprofit organization focused on resolving deadly conflicts. He is the author of the novel Invitation, which was a bestseller in India and Pakistan on its release in January 2011 and was runner-up for the 2011 Edinburgh International Book Festival's award for a first book. He has published political and literary essays and papers for a range of publications, including the Los Angeles Review of Books, Foreign Policy, Jane's Standpoint, and numerous academic and defense journals. He is based in Pakistan and has lived in several countries, including Tunisia, Morocco, Belgium, France, Mauritius, Canada, and the US. He recently completed a second novel. So, welcome panelists and welcome everybody.
Thank you.
I should say a brief word about the title of the panel, because I'm sure it seems to many of you particularly academic to call the panel Subjunctive Fictions. And the title really comes from an idea or a theoretical framework that was developed by an anthropologist in the 1960s and 70s, and his name was Victor Turner. And Victor Turner, writing about performance and ritual, tried to make a distinction between the social dramas that we engage every day, and he called those social dramas indicative social dramas. Indicative in linguistic terms is the mood of fact. It is a statement of assertion or a statement of material reality. Whereas cultural performances, which then signifies in some ways any art practice or any artistic text, is in some ways a subjunctive response to the indicative social drama. So the subjunctive in linguistic terms is the mood of possibility, is the mood of potential. It signifies things that can possibly happen or may possibly happen, not necessarily for the better. In fact, it could be for the worse. And in some cases, especially on our own panel, crime fiction and noir, and the noir novel as a genre is in some ways about a potentiality towards darkness as opposed to illumination. So with that said, the idea about the panel really is how do we talk about, how does fiction talk about the world in which we live? How does it respond to it? How does it touch on it? In what ways is it tangential to? And in what ways is it entirely a fantasy made up in an author's mind that has no bearing on the real world in which we live? So with that said, I'd like each of our panelists to talk about their work in this context, and then we take it from there. Piyush?
So I'm from Mumbai, and I base my fiction in the city. Now, when you say this, what you said was essentially describing the crime fiction writer, because a crime fiction writer is actually writing about society, its ills, and like I said, the possibilities of a happy ending, because a crime novel essentially has a happy ending. The murder or the crime is resolved and the criminal is caught and sent to jail. So but in our real lives it doesn't really happen. So it's always the realm of possibility that we are exploring, because we're trying to provide the catharsis of what can happen in fiction when what doesn't happen in real life. I was asked that question essentially by a senior person when I began my writing career, and they said, in our country, and I'm talking about India, but I'm also saying perhaps it extends to our subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Justice is not really delivered. Crime, as we know, goes unpunished most of the time, and we feel strongly about it, and we feel that there is a sense of a sense of rage and outrage that doesn't, things are not right. But in a crime fiction novel, a person resolves the whole crime, and justice is delivered in most cases, and therefore crime fiction novel is the essence of all subjunctive fiction. Would you say that?
Yes, I would say so. Yes, except I was recently teaching in one of my classes Roman Polanski's film Chinatown,
Yeah, sure.
which is the ultimate noir in which justice is absolutely not accomplished.
Yeah.
And the last line of the film is, of course, forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown, as if somehow Chinatown is the place where, of course, every evil is allowed to flourish, and justice is a figment of one's imagination, right?
Yeah.
The achievement of it. So yes, I think that is one of the popular aims of crime fiction, but there is also crime fiction that doesn't accomplish that deliberately doesn't accomplish
The
that.
noir fiction.
The noir fiction,
yes.
right.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Qaisra?
I've been writing for quite some time, and I would define my writing in sort of three phases. The first phase is when I wanted to write about what was it like growing up as a migrant child with double identities living in Manchester. So these were issues relating to lives as migrants. So they were about real people, about real events, and the elopement was one of those stories based on an incident when a girl left home. What was the reaction of her school teachers? A Pair of Jeans was based on my own experience, how you entered one world You're outside, you are British, you're Western, you enter home, you're Pakistani, you're Muslim. And I love that aspect of it, and I wanted to share that. So the first phase was really talking about issues that were relevant to the migrant society, and I wanted to write about that. Then the second phase was with me as a reader. I loved reading stories set in other countries like India, like Poland. And I thought, as a reader, if I enjoy that, then I would love to write about stories set in Pakistan. So again, the relationship between environment, place is applicable here because I used my own imagination, but as well as real memories. I left Pakistan at the age of 9, but I had those memories. And you know what? Out of all my siblings, I think I'm the luckiest because I came from Pakistan at the age of 9. I had the memories, whereas my siblings were born in England, so they have none of that. I used my memories to my advantage. I wanted to share the world of Pakistan with my reader. And when I wrote my first novel or research, there weren't many so-called English writers as such. This is the younger generation. So it was almost like writing a novel for myself, The Holy Woman. I've been sort of drenched into Western culture, English, Greek, Roman, etc. And there was a lot coming from India, as always. And I thought, I want to write a novel about Pakistan for other Pakistanis, for people like me, so we can call a hero of our own, a world we can identify with. But at the same time, it was from a Western audience to give them a window into that world. So 3 of my novels are set in Pakistan in sort of fictional villages, but they're set in real world. But the latest stage is this now. I travel a lot as a writer. I go to different places, festivals, and I'm picking up ideas and real events. And for example, I'll give you 3 for example. I do a lot of interfaith work, as has been mentioned. I went with a group of Muslim and Jewish friends to Birkenau concentration camp. And straight away, what experience of that massacre of the Jews affected me. So when I came back, within a month, I wrote a story called Train to Krakow about that experience. Nothing to do with my life, nothing to do with my history or Pakistan, but that was the sort of, was the vehicle. Similarly, I went to Boston. I got caught up with you remember there was an ash problem? Any of you remember that? I got stranded in Boston. I went to a museum, a slavery museum, and you know what? It was the most amazing, creative moment of my life. Within 10 minutes, I saw this slavery film, and I had this story. And now I've written, it's called The Slave Catcher. Again, not my history, not my world, but that moment captured it for me, and that's a story. Another story, went to Abu Dhabi for the book fair, and I was traveling to my hotel, and I got talking to a taxi driver about his life. He had actually spent 20 years of his life in Abu Dhabi, and I asked him, when do you go back? He said, I go back every 2 years and 1 month. And that story of his life really struck me. I thought, my God, in 22 years of his life, he's only lived with his family for 2 years. This migration process is terrible. At the same time, when I went back and I spoke to a fellow consultant about life in Dubai, about the classes, the racism, and he said, yes, there is racism. They treat the Western people in a different way compared with the Eastern people. And that man, Nigel, became the character in my novel. So I mean my story. So I just want to share you the different phases. You're using real people, real ideas, etc. So I'll stop there.
Shehryar?
Since you mentioned Chinatown, I can't resist this. Chinatown has a much lesser known and much worse sequel called The Two Jakes. But there's a line in that I think captures noir perfectly, which is Jack Nicholson's character, who's a private detective, says to somebody that what I do might not be an honorable profession, but in this town I'm the leper with the most fingers. And for me, that sort of captures noir as this, this morally desolate landscape where you're surrounded by moral lepers, and it's a matter of counting who's got the most fingers by the end of it. But anyhow, moving on to the subject. I think whether you're working in crime fiction, whether you're a magic realist, whether you're a fabulist, writers, to whatever extent, want to reflect the times that they live in, and that doesn't need to be current affairs as such, or what happened yesterday, but to engage and respond to the energy and the spirit of the time. I think that What Salman Rushdie said about writing Midnight's Children was very interesting. He said that the India that he grew up with in literature was the India of E.M. Forster. It was the India of Passage to India, which we probably all grew up with. And he loved the book, but he said the language that it was written in was this very cold, very hard, very solid language, whereas the India that he knew, and particularly the Bombay that he knew, was the exact opposite of that. It was very hot. It wasn't cold. It was overcrowded. It was stuffy. It was leaky. It wasn't solid at all. And he wanted to use a language that reflected that. And I think he, succeeded very well. There's a wonderful essay that Edward Said wrote about comparing the Egyptian writer Naguib Mahfouz to the Lebanese writer Elias Ghori. And he said that Mahfouz always had a stable Egypt and a stable Cairo to deal with. So he could tell straightforward stories, again, using complete sentences. Whereas Ghori had to contend with the Lebanese experience, which was a total opposite of Egypt. It was unstable in the 70s, which was when he was writing. It was collapsing. It was at war with itself. So the language and the storytelling style that he used ended up reflecting that fragmented, nation state. The sentences don't get completed. A paragraph begins one place in one person's head and moves to a very different place by the time it's over. So I just find these, not just in terms of the stories that we choose to tell, but the language that we choose to tell them in. I think, one of the things that stayed with me after reading Muhammad Hanif's A Case of Exploding Mangoes was not just the compelling plot or the characters, it was the tone of the book, this sense of, detached irony, the sense of subversiveness. For me, that's very refreshing, especially living in Islamabad where, and maybe working in the field that I do, you're constantly dealing with this language of sort of hard power. I mean, to coin a phrase, we live in a hard country. I don't mean that in the sense that Anatole Levin does. I mean that our language is all about using hard power. So if there's an extremism problem in Punjab, it means you drop bombs from the sky on, Rajanpur. And that's how we've ended up in our public conversation defining our nation. Whereas, what I enjoy about reading novels from this country is how it dissolves that hardness and creates a slightly intangible form of, influence.
When you're writing, I'll address this to you, Shehryar, but then perhaps to the other panelists as well. When you were writing your Karachi Noir of the 1970s, this is a time period that you didn't experience firsthand necessarily. How much of the research that you did for the book ended up in the book, and in what form did it end up in the book? Did you transform it? Did you essentially report it verbatim? How did you use it, and how did you structure that relationship?
Yeah. The challenge when you are writing a novel that requires a lot of research and the material, you oftentimes fall in love with the material. The challenge is, and the hardest thing to do is to exclude stuff. The impulse is to learn a lot and then find ways of stuffing that all in, and I think that was one of the mistakes I was making as I was writing it. George Eliot said that fiction is experience transformed, and I think the transformation is the essential activity there. And I've done this with my current book as well, that required a lot of research into a world that I am not familiar with. You have to remind yourself at the end of the day that the novel can do certain things that no other form can, and to emphasize those, you can read about Karachi of 1970 by going to a history book. What I was after was a sense of what was it like? Why is there this look on my parents' faces or their generation, members of their generation's faces when they talk about that time? There's a sense of nostalgia, but also of guilt, this feeling that we let things happen the way they happened. My primary impulse was to get into the details of that look.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Qaisra?
On this subject research, I think for the first 3 novels I wrote, Research did not really play a part. Pakistan is familiar territory. I felt at home in it. It's totally fictional. But when I began to write stories set in Boston, 19th century slavery, is a new subject for me. It took me a whole month to research over the internet through people, and it was hard work. Similarly, for the Holocaust story, again, it was hard work, new territory about the Jewish history, other countries. And it was a challenge. But the biggest challenge I'm facing at the moment, really, is a new novel I'm writing at the moment. It's set in Morocco. I just love Morocco. I visit it regularly. And I said to myself, I want to set a novel here. But really what I didn't realize is a different kettle of fish. I've done my research. I've lived with a family for a week. I've gone back again. I write to them. I ask them for the work. But do you know what? I still don't feel confident. It is another language. It's another culture, another custom. Until I've had it sort of like a rubber stamped by my friends in Morocco, I don't feel it will be credible enough, because the odd mistake can really take away. So research is very important, but really it's also quite challenging when you set your work in other parts of the world.
So in your crime fiction, and even in the films, how much of it is actually drawn from your understanding of the criminal underground in Mumbai? How much of it is completely invented? And in a sense, what I'm asking all of you is to try and give the audience a sense of how you process that transformation, how it happens, and why it happens in the way it happens for each of you individually.
You know, in my earlier session, I've already mentioned it, but I'll mention it again because the audience seems to have changed. In a very early stage of my life, I sort of had a dalliance with the dark side, you know. So I kind of was in student politics, so I was a semi-gangster, you know. So I got first-hand knowledge of all crime, and it happened in front of me, and, you know, I saw it all. And many of the people that I associated with in the time of my student politics days are now politicians and policemen and gangsters and auto rickshaw drivers. So I have a whole bunch of people that I can tap into at any point in time, and I'm in, you know, on and off in touch with them. But most importantly, I write from my knowledge, and my knowledge of my city is that Mumbai is that it was once a great city, and now it is crumbling and dying. And that's what I write about the change. So my characters are all about, my lead character is all about, my books are a sort of a lament of this changing Mumbai and this changing culture that of corruption that is all pervasively all around us, and my characters desperately trying to, you know, hold on to those few honest, you know, strings that he ever, you know, he played with as you know, he kind of you know, weaved his fabric of life with. And that's what my story is all about. And it's the essence of the only research I do is on police procedure, just to make sure that I get that right. But otherwise, it's all from, you know, characters I've met and people I've sort of interacted with, and, you know, guys that still hang in the dark corners of the city.
I mean, this is true for everybody, really. Do you feel compelled to get the details exactly right when you are writing about place? I mean, all three of you have been talking about place and the difficulties of sort of, in a sense, translating place onto a page in imaginative language, right? So, do you feel compelled to get the details right? And if to get the details right means you also get the imaginative world right, or is it okay to make stuff up about the details of place, of city, of location, of country, those kinds of things?
Can I start?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I work really hard at getting the details right, because I sort of want to also introduce people to Mumbai and take them into areas which they haven't been to. So I want to kind of let them also experience it. And by doing that, I take the city and make it another character within the book. and so it comes alive as another character. So when people read my books, they get a smell, and the sights and sounds of the city very vividly. That's my attempt at all times. However, I must say that I have to change certain things. Like I wouldn't name, for example, a bar by its actual name because, and because there could be a nefarious deal going down over there, and I don't want necessarily people to think that that bar is where all things happen. So I changed some details, but if you were to look for that kind of bar, you will find many of those. That's how I do it.
I think in my case, the story, the characters are universal. They can be anywhere, but really, you have to give them the clothing, the locality. That is incredibly important. Otherwise, how would you know it's Pakistan or Morocco? And just to give you one example, I wrote my plot, my story, the first draft, living in Manchester in England. Then a year later, I went to 3 cities, Fez and a little village and somewhere, and everything changed. For example, I imagine a village like Pakistan where homes are very close together. But Morocco is a country which has a lot of land. So in a village, you could have one farm here and another farm 1 mile away. So how could this neighbor of mine run to her home at night time? And I thought, physically, it's impossible. So with details like that. Secondly, the marriage, for example, they have different rituals on certain days. So all of that had to be changed. So for me, it's incredibly important you get your facts right, your figures right, the language right, the feel, the smell of the food. Without that missing, nobody will guess it's in Morocco.
Well, I have a confession to make. I did get some details wrong about 1970 Karachi, and one of the frustrating things about the whole experience was getting text messages from my dad pointing those out as he was reading the book. And he's right here if anyone wants to get more.
Putting his hand on. You should be proud of him. Not for getting it right.
But what was interesting to me was reactions from people who were actually quite upset at the details that were wrong. And they were little things like, one person said, look, there was no Evian water in those days. No one would have been drinking it. So it got me thinking about why do we get annoyed when the details are wrong? And I think it has something to do with putting yourself or putting the reader into a world that they are engaged with, that they have bought into. And so it's almost flattering to think that they care when the detail is wrong, versus just saying, oh, well, it's just whatever, I don't care, I'll read on, there's a story going on. But I think it just says something about how you are in sort of, you want to be as a reader in that place as much as possible.
I just wanted to add, for example, when my first novel, The Holy Woman, was published, before it was published, I gave it to 12 people to read, 6 men, 6 women, 6 of them from England, 6 from Pakistan, because I was really concerned. I was writing from another world. I was writing from another perspective. I know Pakistan is familiar to me, but I could be accused of, what does she know about Pakistan? She doesn't even live here. So I really, really wanted to get that accurate. And when I came on a tour through the British Council, and I had seminars like this at the universities, one of my first things was say, look, I confess, I've written this from a viewpoint of a woman living in another world. I try to make it as authentic as I can, but I know if I was writing it in Pakistan, the novel would be different. So physically, superficially, it's all there, but there are differences. So it was still a challenge for me.
I want to add a bit, because you asked me about my film. Mm-hmm. So my last film was a film called Sikandar, which was made in Kashmir. It's all about the children of Kashmir and the psyche that they have after 20 years of conflict. And so I kind of had to really research that bit, because I didn't know Kashmir. I'd never been there. I went and I spent time out there. I had a sort of a story in my head, and when I went there, I had to change everything, and I had to rewrite my story. And I essentially initially wanted to write it in Hindi, but I ended up doing the film in Urdu, which I do not know so well. So I got people to help me out. So I really worked hard. And at the end of it all, Nobody can make out that it is made by a Hindu Brahmin. It's been written by, the film is, because, you really get in and write from within, and I believe that's the best way to do it.
So, having said all that, one of the things you said, Piyush, earlier is that crime fiction provides an ultimate catharsis, especially in environments or places where justice is forever deferred, right?
Yeah.
So where justice is not achieved in some sense,
Right.
where the function of crime fiction is to achieve justice, where the cops or the policeman or the detective or whomever actually catches the perpetrator of the crime and puts them behind bars.
Right.
So part of us, as our desire as readers, is to actually achieve what is possible, even though we know that it is not real, that it is a fantasy. And on the other side, we want the novel to actually be as accurate and detailed as possible, right? How do you resolve this contradiction as a writer? Or do you see it as a contradiction?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, because you have to get the details right to the extent that you bring the person into the world, and when he buys into that world, in films it's called, what the hell is it called? It's the suspension of disbelief. Once you're in that world, then you take the reader on a ride of the possibilities, and he believes in that possibility, right? But let me tell you, you have to pile on the bad stuff only to that degree that it doesn't break the reader's back. I mean, metaphorically, it doesn't strain credibility, and then bring the happy ending, as it were, as a small ray of light right at the end, which the reader can hold on to, and when he shuts the book. And that's the way I look at it.
I think that even forgetting a happy ending, the mere fact that your novel begins and ends, and that there's a certain element of plot, it's not some will have more of it, some will have less of it. You've already moved a step away from life, and that your everyday life is not necessarily as plotted. It's not this happens and then this happens. So managing that tension, I think, is the at the heart of the debates about literature. Is a story that has a beginning, middle, and end somehow too artificial? And a lot of writers in the 20th century try to move away from that. But I think there's just something about us as consumers of stories that respond to a certain ending, whether it's happy, whether it's sad, but some kind of conclusion that is actually very unlike life.
I just wanted to add to the process of writing, because it's been a very interesting journey for me. When I wrote the first two novels, I fell in love with the world I created, with the characters. I lived with them for 3 years. Why? Because I had that quality time. I had a day job, I had children, but I had that quality time. I could live with it. And then as time progressed, my other job in education sort of progressed with it. I got a very demanding job as a quality manager. I was writing my third novel, Revolt, and can anybody guess how many years it took me? This took me 3 years. This took me 9 years. Why? Because for 2 years I could not touch it for that job. And when I came back to it, the process was totally different. I didn't live with my characters. I did not fall in love with my characters. I couldn't even remember their names. Can you believe it? I didn't know who was who. By the time I started the beginning, it took me months to go to the end. It was like a big blockbuster. And then, most importantly, the quality wasn't there. So I was struggling with trying to write a book of quality, but it wasn't. And I sat on it for another 3 years saying, look, I've been published by people like Penguin. I have a readership. They've enjoyed the book. How can I produce a book that I'm not happy about? So it took me 3 years to get to the quality that I was happy with. And now, guess what? The latest stage, and you people are younger than me, and you're writing at this moment in time, writing my fourth novel is even a greater struggle. You know why? And that will affect some of you, social media. My biggest, what's the word, rival is social media. I've got my laptop. This was written by hand, sent to my PA to type up, come back. Now I'm writing my novel now. I've got a no day job. 1 minute I'm tweeting, another minute I'm Facebooking, another minute I'm checking. I can't connect with my characters. I can't feel for them. And this is the phase I'm struggling with, and it's not right. As a writer, I should be writing with quality, but the modern technology has taken over my life. And I've done a session, a panel on it, say, the pros and the cons. The pros are you are connected to the world, you're promoting, you're getting readership. But the downside is, where's the quality? I'm not even getting the time to write it.
Can I just follow? So one of the things you seem to be saying is that the technology is in some way not allowing you to access or to have a kind of empathetic or sympathetic
it's a distraction more than anything else.
With your characters, yes? And with your characters and perhaps the environment or the plot in which you have placed your characters. But I think perhaps that is actually part of what living in this world is about that disconnection and fragmentation.
That's
and
right.
I think that's partly one of the things that that you both explore as well, yes? So is it about that? Is it about an inability to connect? Is it about, and is that part of how we think of the fantasy of fiction relative to the world in which we live?
Yeah, I mean, Qaisra mentions how it affects her as a writer, but, it's also affecting our readers, in that our readers just don't have time to read big books. And I have friends, journalist friends in particular, who say, look, your next novel better be short, otherwise I'm not reading it. So, everything is now in bite size and 140 characters. So there is a challenge there where, okay, how are you going to matter as a novelist? And I think one temptation to resist is to try to emulate the other forms, such as the visual arts, TV, movies. There's some things that the novel can do that these other forms can't. And I think one really big risk of commercialization is that we start to emulate the other forms rather than build on what the novel can do.
In my case, I must tell you that I sort of embraced the idea of the social network, and I said that I'm going to write about it. But I'm writing a crime novel, so I wrote something called the anti-social network, and it's about a group of people who have a gang called the anti-social network, and they use the social network for nefarious activities. And there are murders, and there are crimes, and there are people chasing each other, and finally we have a happy ending.
Did you say, I mean, one of the people you thank in your acknowledgements, Shehryar, is Chris Batchelder. And Chris Batchelder's first novel, U.S., which actually does not necessarily stand for United States, it could also stand for Upton Sinclair. The great yellow journalist of the early part of the 20th century. And U.S. is an incredibly complicated experimental novel in which an entire chapter is written in the form of haikus. So each sentence in the chapter is a haiku, and the whole chapter then arrives somewhere. Jennifer Egan, in her new novel, well, not new anymore, Visit from the Goon Squad, writes one entire chapter as a PowerPoint presentation. The whole chapter is that. And it's a series of PowerPoint slides, and you get to the end of it, and it's in some ways the experience from the perspective of one of the individual characters, reporting on the life of the other characters and, well, her relationship to them or her relationship to others. So, and these forms, in some ways, are taking the social world we inhabit and the experience of the social world we inhabit and transforming them into a fictional statement or a fantasy statement that in some ways formally touches upon, but does not necessarily in its concrete details touch upon, right? So I think the contemporary novel is doing some very interesting things, and in the hands of really good writers is accomplishing a lot. I think in the hands of terrible writers or mediocre writers, it is accomplishing little. So, and there's a lot, because of social media, there's a lot of self-publishing, and a lot of self-publishing is bad. So talk about how you think about the formal elements of writing relative to our social world and how you might be using those things in your own writing, or whether you are actually still committed to a kind of, I don't want to say conventional, but conventional prose styles that are causally structured, linearly structured, those kinds of things.
You want me to start?
Sure.
All right. So I have, in fact, experimented. My fourth novel, Rakshas, India's #1 serial killer, is an epistolary novel. Yeah. So what that means is that it's put together with, pieces of writing or information or letters or scribbles, etc. But you don't realize it because it is it is taken and narrated by a narrator, and then at the end of it all, you realize that it is actually a diary. So it's quite complex in that sense, but I've experimented with it, and I find that at the end of it, when I did it, it's quite easy for people to understand. It's just, and in fact, they like the idea that it, slowly they start realizing that this is not actually the writer's point of view, it's actually the protagonist's point of view, because it's coming from his reports. Right? So I've tried that myself.
Okay. In my case, I guess I'm experimenting because I write in 3 genres. For example, if you write a short story, it's a different kind of a setup, different characters, short, and set up the content. Writing a novel is different format. I'm also a script writer. I write drama serial. My second novel, Typhoon, was written when I was writing my first drama serial, and I literally had to remind myself, Qaisra, you're writing a novel, not a drama. And many people have described Typhoon as very cinematic. And the reason being because I was writing little short scene where you only have little scene, dialogue, tension, action, everything. And then you go back to your novel and it's about description. So it was like switching from one genre to another, and you are realizing these are different and you have to experiment with them. But what I like to go back to and share, still on the process, the author in current time compared with, say, what it was like at that time. As authors, we have an extra challenge. We are having to market ourselves, we're having to promote ourselves, we're having to come to these seminars. So in a way, that also interferes. For example, my publisher said to me, she loves me. Why? Because I'm into Twitter, I tweet, etc., and it promotes their books, you gain readers, whether they buy the books or not. But another author, he refused to do it. He said, I'm not doing that, you can do that for them. I've got a job to do, I'm going to write. And we were gobsmacked by what he had said. On the other hand, I later admired him. I said, good for him. He's getting on with his work, which is actually writing his book. Here's me spending hours on Twitter telling the world what I'm doing, where am I doing. So that also is beginning to affect with how long are you connected with your characters. In the first phase, I could stay with them. The dialogue would stay in my head. The scene would be there. Now, it disappears. Quickly, you disconnect quickly. You know what my best time is for thinking, girls? Zumba. Does anybody do Zumba? Zumba? I find Zumba the most creative time these days because at other times it's all affected. I'll stop.
I think what you're highlighting is that the novel is and always has been a very wild form. I mean, the first ever novel is probably You're the Academic. Is it Don Quixote? Is that the first novel?
Well, it depends.
How far you go back? Yes.
So that contained a book within a book. As for myself, no, I'm much more boring. I've only just in the second book broken out in terms of writing from different characters' perspectives. So I'm way behind.
I just want to kind of, I keep forgetting my work, so I'm sorry, I just remembered another thing I did. I made a film called King of Bollywood, which was essentially a mockumentary. What a mockumentary is, like Spinal Tap? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it is basically a mock documentary. So I was quite looking at everybody around me and realizing that, we're taking our information from different pieces of video nowadays. We get a YouTube video and we see something on television, and then somebody else, we see something on film. So we sort of piece together our day through different pieces of video that coming towards us. I thought about it like 10 years back when I made this film, and I made it like a mock documentary. So it's about this faded Bollywood star who's trying to make a comeback, played by Om Puri, and I've made it, shot it like a documentary, and used movie clips of his imaginary films that he has done, clips, interviews with other people, interviews with him, a camera following around, a fly on the wall, a webcam, etc., and put it all together and told a story. So King of Bollywood is that. I forgot that I did that, right? So,
I think we can open it up to the audience for questions. We have about 20 minutes. Yeah, great. Yes.
I think it's fascinating, but several questions I thought need to be restated. First, I think invented the wrong word. I think how do you conceive and create literature, which is what we're doing. The living in Bombay, being in Bombay, and having the rich and vast background which you mentioned of the world you write about, it's fascinating. And you bring to life what you see. Research, I'm wondering whether a month's research is adequate. Unless you are with a character, you conceive yourself to be the character, visiting again and again. So I thought literature, levels of literature. And in order to create literature, you really have to be the character, or imagine yourself, be with him or with her, or be against her or against him. Not just, and Twitter I think is a terrible thing. I thought the continuity. And the third thing which I thought is fascinating, listening to you, is the straightforward narration with which you, with great honesty, bring out what you did and how you did it. And I was going to ask, there must be many instances where later on you say, oh, no, that was wrong, so a bit differently. Or someone tells you, not just your dad, but others, the way the situation ought to have developed or could have developed to great advantage.
I didn't catch the last bit.
I think the microphone is going on and on.
Well, why don't you answer whatever you did?
We didn't understand the last thing you said because you moved the mic away and we couldn't hear it.
Yes, I thought responding to informed criticism is always usual and constructive, but responding to ill-informed or malicious or, shall we say, criticism which is not well-based,
right,
and later on trying to recover your breath. And some of the greatest short stories, you know, have been rewritten subsequently at a greater distance.
Right, thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah. But when it comes to criticism, I must tell you I hate my critics. Thank you.
My second novel was...
I want to kill them.
My second novel came out of a short story I had written.
I actually write just for one person, and that's for my wife, right? And I write it and I show it to her, and if she likes it, I keep it. And if she doesn't like it, I have a fight with her, and the next morning I rewrite it.
When V.S. Naipaul was asked about the fatwa against Rushdie, he said that's a particularly harsh form of literary criticism.
That's true. Any other questions?
Yes.
Last question.
Hello. Ms. Qaisra Shehzad mentioned about going to Morocco, and Mr. Shehryar mentioned about the 1970s Karachi, and you talked about Mumbai and about your experiences. So my question is that if someone wants to start writing, if someone hasn't actually done this before, like Ms. Qaisra Shehzad said that I wrote that The Holy Woman, and after 3 years I realized that I hadn't actually done enough on it. So what methodology would one follow? Would you go there in person? Would you observe people? Would you take interviews? And when would you think that it is enough that you can actually script or scribble something down?
I think it would be a variety of things that you mentioned.
How much research would you do before you're actually prepared to write something down?
Are you talking about novel writing, for example, or short?
Novel writing.
Novel writing. As I mentioned earlier, for example, in the case of the Moroccan novel, I would have to do a lot of research. I went there, I interviewed, I've written diaries, but I still believe it's not enough. I still feel I need to do a lot. In other contexts, I feel I'm happy enough, I know enough, and it's there. But somebody like yourself starting off there, one of the advice I was given when I started about the age of 19 was, write about what you know best. Write with confidence. And then don't worry, write it down, share it with people. It might be crap, or you might think it's wonderful, but just accept the criticism and keep on writing. Don't give yourself a hard time. It's not worth it. But try your very best. And if you are setting things in another part of the world, or on a theme and topic you have not a clue about, then I would say either do something else or really do a darn good job, because it is very demoralizing if you get it wrong. Okay?
I'd like to say something over there. I think as a writer, you should write what you're moved by. If you write about that, I think you will write from the heart.
Absolutely.
And you might not have enough knowledge about it, so you should steep yourself in whatever you can get your hands on. Steep yourself in it to the extent that it becomes you.
Yeah.
It becomes a part of you, and then you can write free. And that's how I did it. For example, my crime fiction is all about Mumbai, that's from there, but I mentioned my film Sikandar, which was in Kashmir, and I was moved because these young children boys were brought to Mumbai for a trip from Kashmir, and they were asked, what is it different, that you feel that young boys in Kashmir and young boys in, what's the difference between them? So one of the boys thought, and he said, as a boy in Kashmir, I can name the models and the make of all the guns around me. So I read that, and it kind of hit me right here. I said, what is the psyche of this boy that he knows all these guns? So that's when I went there, and I steeped myself in it so much that then the whole story flowed free from within me.
I don't think you need that solid an idea of what you're writing when you're starting. So it's not a matter of you're first going to do the research, and then you're going to, when you think you have enough material, start writing. Both my books I've begun with just a simple situation, and I've had no idea where it's going. My current book, I had this 60-year-old guy who I knew nothing about for quite a while, and at one point I decided that he was going to be an arms dealer, and then that required a whole year of research to do. But point being, it's just an ongoing, pretty fluid process. I think the key thing is just to get the words on the page and worry about research and all of that as you're going along.
Questions? Yeah, I think, some of the finest fiction has been written by writers who have never visited the places that they write about. My favorite novel that does that is actually Franz Kafka's America, when he had never been to America, didn't know anything about America, and invented an America that was true to the fiction itself. So I think part of it is about finding an imaginative world that you can inhabit with people and letting them do whatever they do in harmony and conflict, and allowing the writing to take you where it takes you, and then looking at it and seeing what you have and figuring out what you really want to write about, and then going back and doing the revision. Because all writing is, of course, rewriting.
Yeah. And one more thing I'd add, which I think is just one of the myths about writing, is the moment of inspiration. You're sitting around and you're waiting for that magic moment, and only then can you really begin. I think if you go down that road, you'll never, get anywhere. I think you treat it like a very mundane activity, like a 9-to-5 job, and just say, today I'm going to write. It might be utter crap, but I'm not going to get up from this desk until 2 pages are in, or I've got 500 words written. So I think demystifying the creative process is worthwhile.
Absolutely.
I want to say, Stephen King was asked this question, when do you know that you're a writer? So Stephen King is the most prolific, writer. So he said, you read and you read and you read and you read till that point where you put down the book and say, this is all crap and I can write better than this. And that's the moment you become a writer.
Which is, Qaisra mentioned several years of interruption in what she was writing, which is because of pressures of work. But artistic creation also has impediments. You're writing something, and then there's a blockade. It's not work, and then you pick up the thread years later. So could you say something about that? How your creativity or your flow or your sort of description or your creation of a picture or a conflict reaches a point where either you don't know the answer, you don't know where to take it forward, and then later on you pick it up, and then you resume, and then you take it to. Could you say something about that?
Yes, I will. Yes, for me, especially being a woman with family, with another career, I find writing is just one strand of my life. People say, "Oh, is writing your world?" I said, "No, it's not my whole world. I have many worlds, but my family is my number one world." And that's where quite a bit of my energies goes. And then I have interfaith work, lots of meeting, talking, all of that work takes on. Then there's the education work. So in a way, as a human being, how much can you cope with? So writing is just compartmentalized as one department. You switch on, you switch off. But to go back to this young man and to what my colleagues have been saying here, you just get on with it. Now, the process, get something on a piece of paper. Don't worry about what it looks like. Don't worry what the end is going to be. Yeah. Just get something on a piece of paper and connect with your world and try to create for myself a world where I can get rid of everything else out of my life and just concentrate on that. So as human beings, we are different. Our lives are different. Our backgrounds are different. And all of that clouds into that world of our creativity, and it impinges on us. And that affects what we write, how long it takes us to write, the content of the writing, the quality of the writing, and exactly what method you use. Do you write at midnight? Do you write in the morning? Do you wait for this wonderful dialogue to come along with you? Or do you just snip away a little thing or record it?
Okay. This is where the research can be a source of inspiration as well, as if you're, just can't move beyond a certain point. I mean, I had a character in my second book who's a journalist, and I just didn't know what to do with her, and until I figured that out, I could not move forward. And so one day I just talked to a whole bunch of not serious research or anything, but just went to their living rooms and said, look, what happened today? What's a day in your life like? And that then provides some material just to start get back into the rhythm of putting stuff down.
I think we have time for one more question. That's at the back there.
The lady
all the way at the back.
And we can take hers also. There's another one
Yeah.
after.
Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to get some knowledge out of you brilliant writers that what are the...
Can you stand up, please? Can you stand up?
Okay.
Sorry, we can't see, so we can't understand.
I wanted to know what are the professional ethics of good writers. Do you have, fictitious writing is a big criteria or category or genre, but do you people like to give authors some real kind of stories and prove facts and figures? Or is this the professional ethics taken as the criteria, or is it considered as the good one? I mean, that's my question. I hope you got it.
Sorry, is the question, is there a professional ethic to fiction writing? Is that, did I understand you right?
No, the general professional ethics for writing, for the readers. What kind of information you want your readers to reach with, and what are your criteria? Do you want to take them to the fantasy and heights, or the good writers, they want to convey the factual things and something that is true, the true stories? Could you shed some light on this? Thank you.
I think the human figure is at the center of all fiction. So I think that if you have got all your facts right, but you've not created a convincing depiction of the human experience, you failed. I don't necessarily call that an ethical issue, but it's certainly an aesthetic one.
I mean, I think the only ethical injunction on fiction writers is that they shouldn't wholesale steal from other writers and translate those verbatim from one work into another work. That doesn't mean that fiction writers don't steal from each other all the time. They do steal from each other, and they appropriate ideas and transform their ideas and push them in different directions. And that is perhaps a borderline ethical issue depending on the degree to which you do it, but just wholesale plagiarism without any acknowledgement is, I think, really the only ethical injunction. Otherwise, fiction is a way for us to explore. In my sense, fiction is a way for us to explore everything possible under the sun, even the most unmentionable, taboo, horrible things, as well as the kindness, the love, the generosity that we experience as human beings. And fiction can do that, even though perhaps ordinary conversations might not. And one of the nice things about fiction is when you're reading a novel, you are actually alone with that novel. You don't have to share it necessarily with somebody.
But Framji, what would you say is at stake if you have a very stereotypical character that plays to that not deliberately but just does play to stereotypes about particular communities, women, race, whatever. Is there no ethical issue there?
Yeah, I don't think there's an ethical issue there. That's an issue well, it depends. If the stereotypical character functions as a stereotypical character for particular narrative reasons, then sure, that's fine. If it's stereotypical because it's bad writing, then it's just bad writing. I don't think there's an ethical injunction against bad writing. There should be perhaps a law against bad writing, but there are no ethical injunctions against it.
Okay.
So,
in my case, I think plagiarism obviously is one of those you shouldn't, but also really disrespecting other authors, for example, backbiting or giving them a bad review just because you're jealous of them, all that. But apart from that is the responsibility of a writer. I would never write anything deliberately that would sensationalization for those reasons, or also something that would offend other people for the sake of becoming popular, for the sake of writing books. So for me, responsibility of a writer is very important. Responsible writing is very important, and that's where the ethicals come from. Write about what you feel strongly, but don't do it at the expense of others, unless you really, really feel strongly about it.
I think we're out of time. Thank you, panelists.
There's one question now, last question.
Yeah, I was just told we have zero time
We're
left.
out of time.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. Thank you very much.
I have to say it's my first time in Pakistan, and thank you very much for being such a lovely audience. Yeah.